Before we start, make sure to remove the battery and the power adapter. On the bottom of the laptop, remove the three 2mm by 2mm wafer screws. Loosen the four door cover screws. Remove the 2.5mm by 5mm screw. Remove the memory door cover. Loosen the two screws and remove the communications door cover. Remove the two 2.5mm by 5mm screws. Disconnect the wireless antenna cables. Loosen the antenna cables from the channels on the laptop. Turn the laptop over and open it up. Carefully unsnap the power button cover starting at the back. Slide the hinge covers off of the laptop. Remove the two 2.5mm by 5mm screws. Carefully lift the keyboard up and slide it forward. Lift the keyboard cable clip up to remove the cable. Disconnect the media button cable from the motherboard. Pull the antenna cables through the motherboard. Loosen the antenna cables from the channels on the laptop. Unplug the camera cable. Unplug the LCD cable. Remove the two 2.5mm by 5mm screws. Lift the display away from the laptop. Remove the bezel by carefully unsnapping the edge and lifting it up around the screen. The bezel may be glued to the screen, so it could be difficult to remove. Remove the six 2.5mm by 5mm screws. Carefully remove the LCD from the back assembly. Unscrew the two 2mm by 3mm screws. Unplug the camera. Remove the camera cable from the LCD back assembly. The remaining piece is the complete LCD back cover assembly. Remove the two 2.5mm by 5mm screws on the left and right hinges. Pivot the hinges to the closed position and loosen the wires. Remove the two 2.5mm by 5mm screws on the left and right hinges. Lift the hinges away from the back cover assembly. Place the hinges onto the back cover assembly. Be careful not to pinch any of the wires. Replace the two screws. Pivot the hinges to the open position. Replace the two screws. Reroute the wires through the hinges. Replace the cable into the back assembly and plug it into the camera. Plug in the camera and replace the two 2mm by 3mm screws. Place the LCD screen into the back assembly. Replace the six 2.5mm by 5mm screws. Place the bezel onto the screen, starting at the hinges, and work your way around the edges, snapping it into place. Replace the display assembly onto the laptop base. Replace the two 2.5mm by 5mm screws. Plug in the LCD cable. Reroute the antenna cables through the channels on the laptop. Plug in the camera cable. Feed the antenna cables through the motherboard. Plug the media cable into the motherboard. Place the keyboard cable into the connector and press the clip down. Place the keyboard into the palm rest starting at the bottom. Replace the two 2.5mm by 5mm screws. Replace the hinge covers. Snap the power button cover back onto the laptop. Close the laptop and flip it over. Replace the two 2.5mm by 5mm screws. Replace the three 2mm by 2mm screws. Reconnect the wireless antenna cables. Replace the door cover and secure with the two screws. Place the memory door cover onto the base and press around the edges to make sure it seats properly. Tighten down the 4 retaining screws. Replace the 2.5mm by 5mm screw. Replace the battery.
We hope you found this tutorial useful. All parts discussed in this tutorial can be found at PARTSpeople.com.